Ken Forrester, Executive Director at Momenta. Welcome to our Digital Thread podcast, produced by, for, and about digital industry leaders. In this series of conversations, we capture insights from the best and brightest minds in digital industry. They're executives, entrepreneurs, advisors, and other thought leaders. What they have in common is, like our team at Momenta, they are deep industry operators. We hope you find these podcasts informative, and as always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Good day, and welcome to our Momenta Digital Thread podcast series. As our listeners know, Momenta has been emphasizing our industrial impact, driving positive change towards sustainability, resilience, and human centricity across critical industries through the use of digital technologies. As we lean into this topic in our future podcasts, I could not think of a better role model than Dr. Timothy Chou, the founder of Pediatric Moonshot. Dr. Chou is considered one of the early leaders in moving enterprises to the cloud, beginning with his tenure as the first president of Oracle's cloud computing business. In 2004, he published the landmark book, The End of Software, which foretold the rise of enterprise SaaS and featured three startups, Salesforce, NetSuite, and VMware. In 2005, he launched the first class on cloud computing at Stanford University, CS309A.stanford.edu. Today, he's the chairman of the Alchemist Accelerator and serves on the board of Teradata and Umnitsa. He recently came out of retirement to lead the Pediatric Moonshot, the mission of which is to reduce healthcare inequity, lower healthcare costs, and improve outcomes for children locally, rurally, and globally by creating privacy-preserving real-time AI applications based on access to the data in all 1 million healthcare machines in all 500 children's hospitals in the world. In order to get to the moon, they've engineered a new rocket, a privacy-preserving real-time edge cloud. Tim, this is going to be an exciting topic, so welcome to our Industrial Impact podcast.
Well, Ken, thanks for having me. It's going to be fun.
It will be. And I remember the first podcast, we featured you in our episode 132 back in March of 2021, where we covered your accomplishments as an entrepreneur, educator, executive, and author. We ended on the topic of your groundbreaking work with Pediatric Moonshot. So today, under the theme of industrial impact, I'd like to go headlong into that topic. Perhaps let me start a couple of questions I asked you last time, because so much has happened in the last couple of years, is to say, what a difference 3 years makes. But let me ask, what are some of the new topics being discussed in your legendary Stanford course and or that you're seeing at your Alchemist Accelerator these days?
Well, Ken, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. I mean, we all kind of know that a little bit over a year ago, right, the whole Gen AI, ChatGPT thing arose. And so, last year, I only do this class once a quarter. Last year, we had the CEOs of Intel, Franklin Templeton, HubSpot, and the AI conversation threaded through everything, whether that's, how it transforms, the development of software to what does that mean for next generation chip technologies. I don't think it should be any surprise that conversation is part of every conversation right now.
And perhaps, I guess, for this year's course, I imagine you might substitute NVIDIA for Intel.
Well, Pat's chasing him down. So he's on a mission there. And,
I tell you.
Just to make a point of it from a nation point of view, I mean, it's really quite remarkable what Intel is attempting to do, and I think important. So it's great to give Pat a stage on which to talk to the next generation of kids who are going to affect much of this change.
Yeah, which I've always loved about your course. It's so forward-looking to have discussions like that with industry leaders at a major university like this, and to do so, especially in Silicon Valley, where everything's pretty much forward-looking. So last time I asked you a question, what would the 2021 Tim Chou whisper in the ear of the year 2000 Tim Chou? So just to see and maybe put a reinforcer on what has changed, I can re-ask the same question, but obviously with the 2024 lens. So what would the 2024 Tim Chou whisper in the ear of the year 2000 Tim Chou?
Probably that there'll be more change than you could possibly imagine. I think, you know, while those of us who've been in the tech business are somewhat used to change, I mean, it's kind of part of the fabric of what it's like to work in this. I don't think in 2000, I would have said, you haven't seen anything yet. I mean, whether that's COVID or Gen AI or, frankly, the rise of the cell phone is even in this category, right? I mean, I don't know that any of us really realized, the impact all this could have or will have. So a lot of times I say to people, I got to be there at the beginning of, quote, cloud computing, which is really, if you go back in time, we're now 15, 18 years into this. The Gen AI thing, we're 1 year into it, maybe. I mean, it's hard to imagine what, go forward another, 10, 20 years, what it's going to mean. So, yeah, I would say buckle up. It's going to be bumpy and interesting. How about that?
The famous story, of course, is Albert Einstein, while he was working in the patent office in Switzerland before he became super famous, right? Quoted as something to the effect of everything that has been invented probably has already been patented, et cetera, right? And my quote's probably way off. But the point is, I think generally as tech prognosticators, VC investors, everything else, we saw more and more refinement of existing things, IoT platforms, AI, et cetera. But man, as you say, Gen AI came out of nowhere in some sense. And it really started to strike me when it was social conversations, right? My wife and I were out with friends, they're in HR, whatever profession, right? Legal, et cetera. And they're talking about how they're using Chat GPT to write contracts or in some cases write code, right? It was like, and this was March, a year ago. And so I agree with you that how fast this has come up. And now we start to really understand and appreciate the impact. I've been to a number of industrial, if you will, conferences like Bosch Connected World recently. And it was every session, Gen AI, Gen AI, Gen AI, right? So it's amazing to live in such an interesting time. And yet, as you say, we're just scratching the surface on the impact of this. So what a great time to be alive in that regard.
Amen.
Yep. So let's jump, as we promised, let's go ahead and jump back into your founding work on the Pediatric Moonshot. And of course, a project to create privacy-preserving real-time applications based on access to data in all 1 million healthcare machines in all 500 children's hospitals. That is quite an ambitious goal. So can you remind us of the overall Moonshot goal here and probably a little bit of the, kind of DNA of how you got to this?
Yeah, I mean, the origin story starts in my Stanford class. I don't know, this 6-7 years ago, a rather unique student shows up who has an MD, an MPH, an MBA, and he is chief of pediatric cardiology at the Children's Hospital of Orange County. His name's Dr. Anthony Chang. Anthony kind of, I'll call it, adopts me because up until that moment, I kind of have a passing knowledge of healthcare, but I'd never been immersed in it. And so by adopting me, I learned things like, you're kidding me. They're still using CD-ROMs to pass data around, which is true even to this very day. And then at the other end of the spectrum, because obviously I live in the tech community, we all know that in order to build next generation deep learning applications, you're going to have access to large quantities of diverse data. And so right as COVID is beginning to descend on us, I'm thinking to myself, are we going to sit around and watch Netflix all day? And I said, no, maybe we could do something useful. And so I brought a team together with the mission, as you have stated, which is to reduce healthcare inequity, lower cost, improve patient outcomes for children locally, rurally, and globally. By how are we going to do this? By creating real-time, privacy-preserving AI applications based on access to data in all 1 million healthcare machines in all 500 children's hospitals in the world. And that has been our mission. As you already alluded to, had to build a new rocket. We engineered what we call an edge cloud, which enables the cloud servers to be in the building. In fact, when we talk to the clinical community, I don't actually use the word edge cloud because they don't like what edge. I go in the building cloud service, right? It's like, okay, that is pretty plain English. The cloud servers are so why do they need to be in the building? Well, the only reason they need to be in the building is that the only way to talk to, and I'll use ultrasound as the example of this, the only way to talk to the ultrasound is you have to be on the network in the building with the ultrasound. And so you can easily guess that the very first conversations with hospital IT were followed with NFW.
Been there, done that, my friend.
Yeah, been there, done that. Well, we're a team of infrastructure. We've been around this type of conversation for years. So we knew, and we engineered over 30 features, security and privacy features. In fact, one of our core team members is a former student who has 15 years of privacy law experience. So we knew security and privacy were not something we wanted to add in at the end. It was core to the architecture of the system. And so we used that to build a capability. So just since some of your listeners are somewhat technical. So in essence, we've engineered what you could think of as EC2 and S3. So compute and storage capabilities at the edge in the building. On that, we deliver a particular kind of application we call a digital twin. I know that word's used many different ways in the IoT space. And the way we use it, it's basically to say that for a class of machines, so I'll use specific example, Philips ultrasounds, pretty much from their big Epic 7s down to their portable Lumifies, the digital twin will replicate the data in the machine. So when I say data in the machine, what is that? Well, that's the static data. Oh, what's the serial number? That's the dynamic data. Oh, what's the last error code it threw out? The environmental data. Where's it located? What's the temperature in the room? And finally, what we call the gnomic data, the actual echocardiogram or blood analysis or MRI image or whatever. These are all presented in what we call edge data services. Edge data services is how we standardize access to the data to enable authorized applications to be able to use any or all of what I just stated as the data coming from the machine. So that's the fundamental architecture. For those who are not technical, I explain it as it's kind of like what Apple's done with the iPhone, meaning they distributed infrastructure around the world. They gave people access to a development environment, to a camera, to a GPS information, and then told the world, please go build Instagram, build Lyft, all these apps that we are aware of using that data. It's the same fundamental idea, except our camera is an ultrasound or a blood analyzer. And fundamentally, we actually do have GPS information. It's just, what are the applications? Well, they're cardiology and orthopedic and, neuroradiology applications. So that's been our journey. I'll just quickly and then jump into questions. We, as an engineering team, we said, let's leave PowerPoint. And so we actually deployed edge zones in 8 children's hospitals on 3 continents. We wanted to be global on day one. And most of our work in the past, I'll say 6 to 9 months, has pivoted into applications. To use the analogy again, if Apple had just released a development environment, we'd all have gone, well, that's kind of cool, but what does this thing do? So they had to build maps and Safari and all these first apps. And so we're focused really in 2 major areas. We call it the Mercury program, which is to allow non-children's hospitals to share images with experts at children's hospitals with a primary focus on emergency medicine and a secondary purpose, which is to allow for second opinions. Your listeners may not know this, but there are not a whole lot of pediatric experts on the planet. In the US, I'll stay with cardiology. We have about 3,000 pediatric cardiologists. By the way, none of them live in any rural county in the United States. In India, we have 300 pediatric cardiologists. In Rwanda, there's one guy. So that leads you to the second part, which is we have dubbed it the Gemini program, which is to build AI in cardiology, in orthopedics. And the particular challenge that we are onto technologically is how do you do this in a privacy preserving way? How do you build AI applications in a decentralized architecture, which is not how ChatGPT or any of the other more commonly understood AI applications have been trained? So I know that was a little bit of a long answer, Ken, but that gives you a little glimpse as to why we did it, what we've done, and kind of where we are today.
I appreciate it. And you hit several of the questions I was naturally going to want to ask. It's, common sense would normally be, let's take a very low overhead use case and develop a technology solution for it. Because if we can make it work there, then we can begin to raise it so that it can work in probably a more regulated solution or environment or more mission critical or whatever. You have chosen what I could probably think of as one of the most mission critical, privacy challenged use cases to go after, right? Pediatric data in the medical profession in touching on North America, right?
Yep.
And so I think it's beautiful because a lot of the things you talk about in terms of your platform, the design, the engineering on-prem, right, as you say, in building, I could literally change the industry from medical to digital manufacturing, right? And a lot of the same needs would emerge naturally, and your platform would likely solve those. So you've chosen the biggest, hairiest, audacious goal. Thus, I think Moonshot is probably appropriate for
yes,
in that regard. So I'm going to ask a couple tech questions, though, because I'm very curious. And again, there's some analogies here to the whole industrial IoT as we like to focus on it. So, number one is really this idea of, you mentioned the digital twin, but getting clean, contextualized data from industrial equipment and systems. I'm curious, how are you solving for that in the Pediatric Moonshot? I.e., are you leaning on the OEMs to actually do the, call it digital twin, or on the end users, or are you guys doing this on a voluntary basis to bring all this together?
So let's describe architecture, and then I could talk a little about capitalization if you like. But so the digital twins for a machine class, we did not want to be dependent on the OEM, because even if we were able to go, oh, let's give us private access, we all know that those are unsupported and in the end will break. So all interfaces to the machines are through supported interfaces. Therefore, we don't really need the OEM to do anything because those are supported. On the standardization/harmonization front, because we've kind of come at it bottom up rather than top down, right? Which I think is a little bit of an advantage for us. What we decided to do is we said, and I'll use blood analysis as an example. So Siemens builds blood analyzer, Beckman builds blood analyzer, right? So the way the digital twins work is that all Siemens blood analyzers, I'll say all, the data that they will deliver through the digital twin will be identical for all Siemens blood analyzers on a global basis in our architecture. And all Beckman data will be standardized across all machines globally. Now, the rationalization of the Beckman blood analysis and the Siemens blood analysis, we leave that as an application level question. We're not trying to crack through that one. What we're trying to do first is let's establish the foundation, which is let's get for a machine class to standardize the data, and leave it to others which have domain reasons. This is where we're not thinking from an application point of view. We're thinking from an infrastructure point of view. We'll let the applications figure out what data they need to rationalize between, in my little example, Beckman and Siemens. Does that make sense?
It does. And perhaps a few minutes ago, you mentioned capitalization models. I'm as interested in how your guys, when you speak of foundation, what is the underlying business foundation? How are you working with all of the members of the supply chain or ecosystem in there? And are you guys, is it a non-for-profit or are you doing it as a profit? How are you guys set up for this?
No, we decided, at the end of the day, we wanted to build something that's sustainable. And if you think of it from conventional nonprofits, all of that is donation oriented, which is an every year exercise that doesn't generally lead to sustainability. So no, Bevel Cloud, which was founded to deliver the edge cloud services, is a regular old corporation. I'll explain the business model fairly simply, which is it's in essence a mimic of AWS. In fact, internally we call it BWS. So, here's compute and storage instances, and they're so many dollars per month. We're more in a reserved instance model of the world. Mm-hmm. And, just like AWS, who started with just a couple EC2 and S3, today they've got 37 variations of that and 400 different services. We also see the same thing. We, meaning Bevel Cloud, see the same thing, creating additional services. Obviously, we've been working a lot in decentralized or federated learning. So that's an example where we could be developing capabilities that go beyond just the conventional compute and storage services. So that's very straightforward, like I said, fairly simple business model. From a capitalization point of view, so I have funded our efforts to date. The pediatric healthcare market is not something our venture capital friends are very interested in. In fact, I have some interesting data. I forgot who put it together. The amount of money invested in pediatric healthcare last year was 30 million. De minimis amounts of money, because obviously in healthcare, it would be more lucrative to go after old, rich people as a market rather than kids, which is obvious. I said it to somebody this morning. I said, yeah, if you and I were money investors, why would you if you're going to do all this effort, go after old, rich people is obvious what you should do. So we've known that for quite some time. Or I've known that for quite some time. We have sized the next level of what we're working on, what I described as Mercury and Gemini, at roughly 112 million. As I said, we're not going to venture. We're not going to the children's hospitals. I've now deep dived into some of their economics, and it's crazy. UCSF Children's over here, 20% of their operating budget is donations. The hospital runs on donations, which is, just kind of sad if you want. Yeah. So we're not going there. There's no money there. So we fundamentally are on two paths. One is government sponsorship. So some of your listeners may know that the origin of the internet was really the United States government under the aegis of ARPA, basically funded the foundational backbone of the internet. We, in essence, are building a network as well. If you listen to how we're talking about it, 500 children's hospitals. And obviously, as we extend this out into adult medicine as well, we're building a network. And when you build a network, you can't do it one node at a time. You have to do it together. And so conveniently enough, or maybe a blessing, there's a new agency that got started called ARPA Health that was allocated $2.5 billion about a year and a half ago. So we are deep in conversations with ARPA Health. We've also opened up conversations with the government of Singapore. We're going to have some introductory conversations in Norway. Because if you think about it, we're fundamentally building infrastructure, and it makes sense for governments to fund infrastructure. The other major axis is corporate, what we call corporate sponsorship. So I'll have a little fun with you and say, my friends at Juniper Networks, I was talking to them. I said, hey, you guys, you spend like $1 million to put a logo on a Formula One race car. And they went, well, it's way more than that. I said, okay, you're helping me make my point. So we have various threads going on with leaders in various industries. I'll give you one example, which is kind of curious. So I had the CEO of AGCO come and do my class, actually, first time like 4 years ago. The new CEO came this time. And so I posted something in LinkedIn. And so because I've known the AGCO guys, in fact, they're a chapter in the book Precision that I wrote about IoT many years ago. And so one of the guys who's the global product manager for their Fent product line sends me a note. He says, "Hey, you haven't talked in a while." So I said, "Oh, Matt, let's get together." So we did a Zoom meeting. I'm describing what we're working on. And I said, "Well, Matt, we were thinking maybe AGCO could sponsor the state of Georgia." So one other idea we've been playing with is, 50 states, maybe the largest company in each state sponsors for 2 million. That gets us close to the 115. So I said, AGCO is a major employer in Georgia. So 2 million, what about that? And so Matt goes, "Well, actually, I have a much better idea." I went, "Okay, I'm good with that." He said, "Well, our customer and your customer are the same." And I never thought about it very much, but obviously what we are working on, while if your mom works for Google and you live in Palo Alto, it could make a difference. It makes a huge difference if your mom works on a farm in Southern Illinois and you're, 300 miles away from any children's hospital. And by the way, the rural communities are also where all the farming equipment, ag equipment gets sold. So my customer is your customer, right, really resonated. And so we're actively having conversations in the agricultural vertical, which to your earlier point has an interesting overlap coming from a product side, because at the end of the day, all of that agricultural equipment, right? I mean, they're trying to do the same things. Meaning, can I do, as we know, they've been working on preventative or predictive maintenance, which is really, from our point of view, dynamic data about the machine. But in the end, what's really important is, the agronomic data, like, well, what's the boron level? What's the weather, right? And all of these things have similar challenges from a privacy and a real-time perspective, trying to aggregate all the data centrally to go learn on. My point of view is, in healthcare, it's never going to happen, privacy, preservation, et cetera, and the data volumes. But I think, in the end, in many industries, the idea that I'm going to put all the data in one location and let you learn on it, it's going to work for some consumer stuff, but I don't think it's going to work for a lot of other industries.
Yeah. I think you've undertaken one of the largest digital transformations that I can imagine in one of the toughest industries in that regard, again, which makes you applicable and useful for a lot of other industries. You mentioned agriculture in that regard. So it's a beautiful story. I'm glad we've had this conversation to kind of bring that out. Let me bring back the industrial impact element of it. And that is really getting down to the impact you've had, some of the peoples whose lives you've changed by this work. Can you tell us a story or two?
You made a comment about Moonshot being ambitious and big. I also tell people this is my last great project. It's really a confluence of people I know, technology I understand, that in a weird way comes together for a purpose that is game-changing. Our hope is we can solve problems. I'll give you two stories just for people to think about how technology can impact this. There's a kid, it's a friend of mine, who went in for optional shoulder surgery in Arizona. There were complications during the surgery to such an extent that they decided to airlift him out of Arizona to the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. He arrived on the helicopter. The CD-ROM of his CT scan did not. He actually died later that day. Now, whether or not that image could have made a difference, I mean, none of us really know, but it certainly couldn't have hurt to be able to have that. And that state of the art, I mean, we've spent time with Howard Memorial in Willits, California, population 5,000. To this very day, this very minute, when they transport a kid to emergency at Stanford, at UCSF, at Shriner's burn unit, et cetera, they send a CD-ROM. I mean, which oftentimes does not make it for a variety of reasons. And oh, by the way, even if it gets there, they can't read it. And I mean, it's just stupid given the type of technology we have in front of us. So that's one end, super simple, right? That we could change that on a nationwide basis, on a global basis. Let me give you another one, which is we can make a difference. There's a kid in Florida right now. He has had seizures 2 to 3 times a day. At night, he wakes up screaming for the past 12 years. Now imagine being his parents or his siblings. I mean, this is life, right? They MRI imaged him early on, didn't see anything. They went down this progressive path of every pharmaceutical, some he could afford, some they couldn't afford, none of them effective. They were getting ready to do electrical implants, and they re-MRI imaged him. And now what they believe is he has a condition called focal cortical dysplasia. It is a brain lesion. Actually, I can show you a picture of it, although for all of us, we look at it and go, I can't see anything. It looks as fuzzy as the next thing. Now, the cool thing is focal cortical dysplasia, you can actually surgically remove that lesion and the kid's cured for life. Freaking amazing, right? Now, the good news is there's only 2,500 of these cases in the United States every year. Okay, that's good news. The bad news is no one pediatric neuroradiologist can possibly see enough of these to be able to go, oh, I can see focal cortical dysplasia. Now, this is trivial from our point of view. You go, well, if I had every MRI image of every kid across the planet, do you think I could build a focal cortical dysplasia application that could diagnose it and run it in real time on every MRI machine? Hell yeah. That's not hard to go do. We can do that. So I think the promise of whether it's to make it so that we can use modern technology and save time and save lives in emergency medicine, all the way to diagnosing what you could term rare diseases globally. It's there. It's there to be had. And so I think that's inspired our team, our larger team of people. In fact, just as a comment for those listeners, please www.pediatricmoonshot.com. Check it out. We do a monthly newsletter. We're on LinkedIn. We've actually just started a TikTok campaign. We're doing a series of podcasts under Pediatric Moonshot. So for people who are interested in following along or potentially becoming part of the crew, is like what we like to say, please reach out.
What great set of stories and the impact that you're having. And it's beautiful because the technologies you're developing truly cutting edge, but also very much aligned with state of the art that's now and bringing to this critical domain and the critical lives that are there, new solutions, new capabilities. And I think it's great that you're getting both a combination of government sponsorship and corporate sponsorship. And I would encourage certainly our listeners to learn more about this initiative, but also looking at it as a pattern for change, right? For truly transformational change that's out there. So there is so much we could talk to. And I didn't even get to the Gen AI, closing question, but I'm afraid we're out of time, which means we may get to do this a third time, Tim, because I think there's so much more here that we could talk about, but hopefully it won't take us 3 years to get back together to learn more on this. So with all of that, Tim, let me just thank you for taking this time and sharing these great insights with us today.
Yeah, well, Ken, thanks for having me and glad to come back and be a guest again. So thanks.
I'd really like that, Tim. So this has been Dr. Timothy Chou, founder of the Pediatric Moonshot. So thank you for listening, and please join us for the next episode of our Industrial Impact podcast series. We wish you an impactful day. You've been listening to the Momenta Digital Thread podcast series. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion, and as always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Please check our website at momenta.one for archived versions of podcasts, as well as resources to help with your digital industry journey. Thank you for listening.